today's discussion. This is basically going to be a discussion really about what we have experienced in the past 2 years. I believe all of us have been affected or impacted by this pandemic, and it is really for us to share lessons that we have learned and how basically we can improve on our delivery as supply chain professionals. So just some key pointers or discussion points that I believe will basically benefit us today. We're just going to look at how, as a country, or how, as a fraternity, we were prepared for a pandemic of this magnitude. I will highlight on issues specific to Botswana, basically touching on how the pandemic has affected Botswana economically, and then basically just go on to issues around vulnerability, around risks, and how we have dealt with such over time. So then, as some of possible solutions or possible remedies, I'll basically cover on some of the technological considerations that we can basically look at to try and help us deal with the issues, and most importantly, how we as a profession we can basically contribute to basically alleviating or helping the country or helping the businesses that we are part of really sort of deal with the challenges. And at the end, just touch on some of the lessons that we have learned and some of the actions that we can take to really try to get out of this, if that is something that is foreseeable. Okay. So basically, in terms of the preparedness, I believe you can all share the sentiments or share with me that really coronavirus has impacted supply chains to the scale that basically is unimaginable, and really it has caused so much devastation to the world, with really marked global socio-economic consequences. So it might have started as something that we believe to be very small and very localized to a region in China called Wuhan. But since that time, I believe it was around December 2020, we saw the pandemic really spreading throughout the world and basically affecting businesses, affecting industry, and really causing a lot of damage to the world as we knew it. And basically looking back, we can really imagine such destructions that the pandemic has caused, destroying livelihoods and basically leaving a lot of supply chain in tatters. So the other challenge and the other key concern is that we may not really know as to when we are going to emerge out of this. It's something that basically started about 2 years back. It is continuing basically to cause havoc, to really affect businesses, to affect industry, and really cause such destruction to the world. And really, we believe this is something that we could have planned better for, something that basically we need to really see how we can basically use the skills that we have gathered to really try and basically emerge out of this pandemic, because it's something that is really causing a lot of pain to our lives, and we really want to see this over. So just looking at Botswana, how has the pandemic affected Botswana? So according to the World Bank, the pandemic has really exacerbated some of the existing growth challenges that we had. We know as a country, we're basically trying to grow from, I think, one of the least developed countries to a medium sort of developed country. So we're basically trying to come out of this and really be one of the powerhouses really in the world. And our growth has been curtailed to some degree by coronavirus. And this basically has led to contraction in the real gross domestic product of around 8%. Other institutions basically look at around 8.9%, like Statistica. So it's something that basically has got huge repercussions on our economy, and is continuing basically to really cause that sort of that damage to our economy. Also, basically, this has been as a result of maybe reduced demand globally, reduced or increased travel restrictions. We know we have been really in a number of lockdowns where movement has been really restricted. Going to workplaces have been sort of restricted, leading to basically production stoppages. Basically, as we know that a lot of our economy is driven by highly contact intensive activities like mining, tourism, etc. This basically has been hugely affected. And as a country, we basically suffer fiscal deficit that is believed to widen to 11.3% of GDP in the year 2020-21 from what it was maybe the 5.6% in 2019-2020. So we know that a huge contributor to our economy basically comes from mining. And we also know that Botswana is heavy on the civil service side, where the wage bill basically covers a very high percentage. So these are some of the issues that basically we have to contend with, because we are not a production focused, or we're not basically high on manufacturing. So we rely a lot on imports, and a lot of countries that basically we import our goods from basically also have faced these kind of challenges, and this is something that basically is continuing to affect us. So the IMF believes that there is some recovery that is underway, but because of the high uncertainty, this is becoming problematic. More so that we are seeing the pandemic evolving with time. We've seen different levels of disease, from level 1s, level 2s, and with different variants that basically affect the global populace. So in terms of supply chain vulnerability, since Botswana is highly dependent on imports regionally and also across the world, the disruptions that we have experienced basically become a huge challenge, more so that we have to move goods inwards. And because of such, restrictions and lockdowns, this becomes very difficult if we are to get in the necessities that we need as a country. So we depend a lot from our neighboring country, South Africa, for food supplies, and we have seen shortages basically due to difficulty in getting them across. We've seen prices go up. We have seen people buying in such a distorted fashion, which basically makes demand planning something that is very, very problematic, and which basically complicates the supply chain efforts by the different industries or different entities that basically are responsible to get these foodstuffs into the country. So, I mean, we need to really sort of look back and say, how do we get in the vital necessities, the pharmaceuticals? We know that a lot of the remedies that we basically need to deal with the pandemic are health related. So how do we get these supplies into the country? We've seen basically a lot of spending being diverted from what they used to now buying a lot of PPE, and this basically have really come at a premium where basically what we paid for is really not in line with the normal prices, but basically hiked as a result of the supply and demand challenges. Because as we know, with high demand and with restricted or very concentrated supply, there tends to be shortages, and these shortages basically lead to very high price hikes. And this is something that basically continue to affect. So if we need such, and if like we know that the world as a whole has been affected, we know that the sources or the producing countries where we get these things are also affected. So they tend to basically prioritize on their own citizens. And really, if they want to help their citizens first, how then do we get what we need? So the reason why probably what we get is going to be at such high prices and being very difficult to contain. So just some drivers that cause supply chain vulnerability. This basically is taken from our friends at McKinsey. So typically organizations tend to focus internally on their own planning, and maybe they are very narrow supply networks where they carry out their demand planning, and where basically they look at the complexity of their needs and see how these are basically resilient to disruption. So as we know, a lot of the matrices or a lot of models that we use, like your Kralik metrics, basically look at our expenditure, look at basically the complexity of the market, and sort of come up with strategies as to how we can try to improve the supply, or how we can improve maybe the value from transacting with the different players that are in our immediate supply chain. So to really get a fuller picture, we need to also be looking at other several dimensions, like transportation. Okay, look at how resilient the physical flows and logistics network are. We know we've been very reliant on the road network, but I think right at the beginning of the pandemic, we've seen how this was affected with maybe the fuel shortages, with the strikes in South Africa, where even the foodstuffs were difficult to get through. And we basically have to look at other modes of transportation. We basically have airports that are underutilized, and we've seen that a lot of our requirements have since been flown in through our airports. And this is one area where we basically need to look at to see how we can develop that area to try and get a lot of air freight into the country so that distortions that we basically, the challenges that we experience on the road networks basically can be sort of done with. So again, maybe trying to not just rely on South Africa. We have Zimbabwe, we have Namibia, we have Zambia and other countries that basically we can try to see how we can try and improve movement of goods so that we are not so much reliant on just one source. Another dimension really is the financial resilience. Do we have the financial muscle to basically go through with this? We know we have spent, I think, an arm and a leg really trying to deal with the necessities, the essential. So we've moved a lot of expenditure from what we used to spend on to try and get the pharmaceutical, the vaccines, other key necessities basically that help us deal with the disease. But how much of this do we have? How much of these finances do we have to sustain us or to carry us through? So this is an area where we basically need to look at, because we know that the working capitals of different organizations have been very much affected. Our suppliers have been, to a large extent, being unpaid. And really, this basically creates maybe tension between us and our suppliers. So we need to see how we can deal with them to basically make sure that such does not persist. What is it that we produce? Looking at the products that we make, we need to also look at the raw materials, or we need to look at basically the inputs that go into such products. How sustainable are they? Are we able to change maybe specifications so as to tolerate or to accommodate maybe alternative products that we can use when maybe the primary products are in short supply? How do we deal with issues of regulation? Because we know that a lot of products basically have to go through certain approvals, certain, they have to basically be approved. And if such products are not maybe eligible for use, then how do we deal with such issues? And then lastly, the last dimension basically is the organizational maturity, basically looking at the entity as a whole, how it deals with its processes internally, how it deals with its interlinks or its interfaces, because we know we deal with suppliers at different tiers, we deal with customers also at different tiers, we deal with the regulator. So as an organization, we also have to basically evolve and reach a certain level of maturity that basically can help us deal with some of these challenges. So just a number of risks. I know really we've had to contend with quite a large number of risks, and the list really is endless. So I just want to touch on some few points, basically to get us thinking and maybe to get discussions on as to really how we can sort of deal with some of these challenges. So I think the first one that I put there is poor visibility along the pipeline. So the thing is, as organizations or as a country, we can't just be limited to the suppliers that we deal with on the first tier or second tier. We need to basically look at the entire supply chain to see where everything basically emanates from, where it comes from, and what the different players in the industry have to face or have to deal with to get the commodities through. What will we or what pain will we suffer? Should we or should our first tier or second tier suppliers fail? Do we know how they deal with their suppliers, maybe in the third tier, fourth tier, and fifth tier, etc.? So we need to basically try and broaden our scope, broaden our reach in terms of really knowing what happens from the upstream, maybe from maybe the third tier going onwards. Okay, how will we deal with maybe such disruptions? So because, for instance, if maybe the key pharmaceutical products that we need maybe to help us are not available from the second tier, are we sure as to when we are going to get them? Or are we basically going to be so much at the mercy of our second tier kind of suppliers? Looking at the volatility of demand, how do we deal with such? We've seen really from the onset or from the beginning of the pandemic, where when maybe something was believed to be or to go into short supply, I will not talk about fuel. We know what happened to our fuel situation, where even when we had, or probably experts said we had enough to basically carry us through the period, people went into panic buying. We looked at foodstuffs. People, when they were told you are going into lockdown, bought groceries full or bought trolleys full of groceries, basically impacting on what others basically would normally have to get. So if one basically hoards and gets more than enough, this basically creates a distortion to the supply chain. And this basically sends signals to the shops that, oh, these things are in high demand, when in actual fact, they have been basically directed to basically one place where a lot of other customers who would need such products are going to be left without what they need. So this then sort of sends signals to the upstream supply chain to keep on producing, but we know that production basically was curtailed. We know that when we produce more than we need, we are bound to basically have more than we need in the market, leading to expiries. And this basically is not good for anybody, because for one, when the demand sort of spirals, there is shortage, which basically drives prices up, and basically something that creates sort of huge problems to the supply chain. Okay. Another issue is the asymmetric power relationships. We know suppliers tend to have power, or we basically have situations where certain buyers, if they are maybe larger than their sources, that basically can also create that imbalance. So we need to basically see how to deal with such asymmetries, so as to improve collaboration, to improve relationship, and ensure that basically there is seamless flow of goods really along the supply chain. So one thing that basically we have seen is we need to try and broaden our reach. We know from our studies as supply chain professionals that to really leverage on what we buy, we need to rationalize the supply base and maybe concentrate our needs on the few suppliers that we basically sort of qualify and basically are happy that they are going to provide us with good quality, etc. But I think the coronavirus pandemic sort of present a different picture, or says to us that while it may have been a good practice to do that rationalization, putting your eggs in one basket now is more of a problem or more of a challenge. So we need to see how we sort of reduce that dependency on a few players and sort of have avenues where we can get what we need when we need. Okay. So other issues really are the production shutdowns, where material that we have procured. I mean, imagine organizations that probably buy material that are going to go into production the next day or in the not so long period after. So, I mean, we've seen situations where a lot of industries, I can basically name one, which is Kalahari Breweries, which has gone into numerous shutdowns where production had to stop. And I mean, how do they deal with a product? I mean, they deal with a product that is living. And if you are going to basically prevent business or prevent that from being sold, how is it going to affect their business? So obviously this leads to a lot of product distractions, a lot of operational challenges where, I mean, you know, with manufacturing, it works with changeovers, it works with maybe you moving from this product to another. So when you basically shut down for a long time, how do you then clean or sanitize the place so that you can commence your operation? So all of these basically are key challenges that organizations basically have had to deal with. So regulatory changes, I think we are all fresh from the key regulations that have been affecting our country, the state of emergency and its regulations maybe attached to it. So a lot of organizations probably have been affected by this. There have been statutory instruments issued, maybe that we as procurement people have had to apply, where, I mean, we know with challenges that happen and that affect a number of countries, jurisdictions basically want to protect their own citizens. And we know that a lot of services have had to be directed to locals so that we support them and so that they have a livelihood. So Parliament has had to pass some statutory instruments that basically were to benefit certain groups of our supplier population, so as to support the local, support the disadvantaged communities, to support the young, the women, etc. And we've had numerous curfews, lockdowns, basically, which basically curtail movement and sort of made basically the business activities as we know them fluid. So there have been sort of restrictions in that end. So again, the other area where basically we have been affected hugely is with regards to our suppliers. We know really we depend on them for what we need, but where we don't have money and our working capital is so much affected, we've had to choose either to pay employee salaries at the expense of maybe the supplier invoices that basically were due. But suppliers also have their own employees. How are they going to pay their own employees when we as an organization prioritize on our employees, and yet we get inputs from the suppliers who also have to pay their suppliers and also pay their employees and pay their creditors? I mean, we have to strike a balance there, but it's something that basically can be tough, and probably we look at our house first before we look at other entities. But really, this is really going against what we believe as supply chain professionals, that we need to really not just look at our own sort of entity, so where we basically are going to sort of be I mean, where we are going to basically look at our own needs, but we need to basically look at a larger picture. We need to look at the entire supply chain and to see how that becomes sort of efficient and effective in addressing the needs. So people have had to be laid off. We've seen a lot of organizations close down. We've seen downsizing that basically came at the expense of maybe lower demand or no business at all. So with people being laid off, it becomes vital really for organizations to consider some technical or technological solutions to help with this. I mean, certain organizations basically are left with only 1 or 2 procurement professionals, or a very few. But then if a lot of activities are going to be manual, that one individual, those few individuals that are left, can't deal with it. And again, with working from home, where a lot of sort of the work has to be done from home, we need to be provided with solutions that basically can improve our effectiveness and efficiency. So we need to consider things like e-procurement solutions, and that basically are available for me when I'm at home right now. I need to be provided with either like virtual private networks access, where I can get into that gateway to do work, or basically cloud solutions. And when we basically issue our tenders, again, this has to be done in a manner that basically reduces the voluminous paper that often was sent around. We need to have secure sort of sites where suppliers can access our requirements and basically submit their tenders and basically be able to conduct electronic auctions or reverse auctions at the comfort of our homes, and where basically such platforms basically will be secure and will allow really for ease of work and for decisions basically to be made quickly, okay? And again, this basically also talks to the governance issues. So when we now going to be working at a distance, are we in any way going to compromise governance issues? We know certain approvals have to be done or to be made by committees. So what will those committee members follow? What will they use to make such key decisions? So we know of blockchain solutions, the Internet of Things, where basically a lot of the solutions basically have to be reliant on certain technologies. In supply chain, we have your RFID, radio frequency identification systems. We have your barcoding, where we need to be able to track our merchandise or our purchases basically in real time, so as to ensure that we don't miss out on any lead times. But again, these things are going to come at a cost, and we need to invest in such technologies so that we benefit. There is also the AI, artificial intelligence and robotics, where a lot of manual things basically can be sort of automated so that these are done by such robots in like 24/7 kind of environment. But again, you say, if we are going to do that, what is going to happen to the workforce? Because these people need, okay? Because these people need to, okay? So basically to finish this up, basically I'll just talk about people. So for us to emerge from this crisis stronger, we need to really reskill our workforce. We need to expand the ability of our people to operate in a fully digital environment, develop their cognitive skills so that they can respond to innovation and organizational redesigns. We need to strengthen their social and economic, emotional skills, so as to be to collaborate, and also enhance their adaptability so as to thrive in this challenging environment. Okay, so I think this is what we say. We as professionals, we need really to think differently, to be creative, and to come up with sort of better ways of dealing with pandemics like this when we go into the future. So the lessons learned, we may not be able to plan for every possible outcome, but we need the right processes that basically we can use to react to these unforeseen events. And again, to survive this volatile world, our supply chain needs to be resilient to disturbances. So again, I say, were we prepared for this? Can we foresee another sort of disturbance? It may not be a pandemic, for instance, but we need to be able to be prepared. So we've seen that COVID-19 has really exposed critical gaps and vulnerability in the supply chain, and we need to avoid thinking in sort of silos, so that we hope and we look at the entire supply chain to improve end-to-end visibility, to improve on collaboration and optimization. So I've talked about the need for diversification so as to improve supply continuity, and really we need to think differently so that in this new normal, as we call it, we are able to now come up with new ways of doing business. So lastly, just the action plans that we can use, mapping all our suppliers from different tiers, especially those in high-risk areas. Look at the items that we get from them and gauge the exposure of such risk, and maybe consider alternative sources. Screen suppliers for basically the sector value, in addition basically to the high risk that they may be, and maybe look at contracts, review them to determine if there are any force majeure clause that basically can be invoked to help minimize or deal with costs. And really, lastly, keep track of all the costs if suppliers are not going to deliver, or if manufacturing is going to stop, or if you're going to basically consider taking on new suppliers that probably were not in our portfolio. So I think this is all that I had, and I think it will get the discussion going.